You are listening to the Bat Flip Podcast, a baseball podcast from Belly Up Sports and the Belly Up Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Damian and Matt.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damian here with my co-host, Matt, coming to you on February 15th of 2022. Going to have a little bit more of information on the CBA talks that happened over the weekend. We have a retirement to talk about, and then we'll jump into the NL West division breakdown. But before we get into all that, how you doing, Matt?
Doing pretty good. Just had a pretty good week, and hope everyone else out there is doing well. And been pretty solid. I'm hoping that I'm getting kind of sad because I think pitchers and catchers were supposed to report maybe today.
Yeah, it was today.
Yeah, and obviously that's not happening because, as Damian said, we're going to be talking about CBA negotiations, which that means they're still not done. So it's disappointing, and I think they've given a deadline of February 28th to the end of February to start the season on time, which seems like it might be a little bit early, but for that to be the deadline. But obviously this needs to get done, so we'll have a little bit of info on that. But everything's been good this week, and hope you're doing well as well.
Yeah, doing well over here. Enjoyed a good Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That was a really good game. I was going for the Bengals, but I'm not mad to see Matthew Stafford and Odell Beckham get their ring.
Yeah, I know. And I was going to ask you, does anybody since you're from near LA, does anybody out there care that the Rams won?
Yeah, I mean, I still do know a lot of people that are Rams fans. They don't care as much about Chargers,
Right.
but a lot of them do still care about the Rams.
Right. Because the Rams have their history there, from many years ago. So it does make sense that some fans, older fans, and then people who have, been raised by some of the original Rams fans would care. But yeah, it's kind of weird watching on TV, and obviously it doesn't matter for the Super Bowl because it's supposedly a neutral site game, even though it was in the Rams home stadium. But before the Super Bowl, it was kind of weird watching the 49ers just take over their home stadium. But anyway, so we'll see what it was definitely an interesting Super Bowl, and now next on the docket outside of the continuation of basketball going on right now is the the MLB season, hopefully. So let's get into that.
Yeah, so I think it was like Thursday or Friday. Evan Drellich of The Athletic reported that there was going to be a CBA negotiation meeting on Saturday between the players and the owners again. And before that, Rob Manfred had talked on Thursday at his press conference. We talked about the owners had meeting and the players were meeting last week. Basically, Manfred confirmed a couple things in his in his press conference or State of the Union type thing. There basically will be a full-time DH this year, which I think a lot of people have been clamoring for, especially since the 2020 season we had it. And then last year we went back to the normal AL and NL styles of games. And I think a lot of people missed the DH. The elimination of draft pick compensation and free agency. So when people get the qualifying offers, and then the talks, I don't think it's completely finalized, but it seems like it's heading in the right direction, that there will be some sort of a draft lottery in this new CBA.
Yeah, so those are some interesting points. Obviously, the DH is going to be a big deal, and we already saw that in 2020. Obviously, 2021 we saw pitchers hit, and rest in peace to pitchers hitting. It was fun to watch some of the better pitchers in the league hit. Like you watched Zach Greinke hit, you watched Jacob deGrom hit. Back in his day when Bumgarner was really good, you watched him hit. Jake Arrieta when he was good, you watched him hit a lot. And those guys were fun because you could see him hit home runs and occasionally. And
What's Shohei Ohtani going to do now?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Probably DH and hit. So, but yeah, I mean, I was gonna get to that in a second. None of those guys are Shohei Ohtani. So obviously, if you have a guy who's a true can really hit and elevate a lineup, you're gonna be watching Shohei Ohtani. But it was fun, to see guys other than the generational Shohei Ohtani, show off their athleticism a little bit at times. But I think it can go either way because a lot of people don't like watching half the pitcher more than half the pitchers in the league go up there and strike out 70% of the time. So definitely something I was hoping that they would maybe, and I guess it's still possible, they would maybe tie the DH to the pitcher in the game, where you lose the current DH that's in the game if you take the pitcher out. Kind of keep that National League style of baseball going to a certain level. But it sounds like that's probably not happening. It sounds like they're just going to eliminate the DH altogether, which I guess it's fine. You're just gonna use the American League rule. So. I guess end of the day, you're gonna have a new you're gonna have DH, and that's gonna make the whole game different. It really is. So, and it's also good that they've decided this now, and we have clarity on when the second portion starts back of free agency, whenever that may be. um, after post lockout, we'll know, teams will know what they need, and it'll probably help some of the players like a Freddie Freeman or an Anthony Rizzo that teams are a little bit worried about giving extra years to, because now they'll know that they can transition into a DH once once they age a little bit more. So definitely interesting stuff there. Draft lottery, I honestly don't think that really ends up mattering all that much. I mean, bad teams are still going to be tanking. I mean, I don't think it addresses it like people think it might. I mean, it's not like the NBA doesn't have teams tanking constantly. And then you look at the lack of the CB, or the lack of competitive balance picks in the draft, where you have a player with a qualifying offer has the draft pick compensation goes with that. That's actually really interesting, and I think that's something that was probably fought for really highly by the players.
Yeah, I didn't know it quite exactly how it was going to work with the draft pick compensation wise, because to me, I think part of it with the players, with the team losing a player, they probably should have been able to still get something, but that's just going to be completely eliminated now. So I think it's going to open up a lot more for like a mid-season trade deadline that's going to allow teams to move people for more freely. Like we would have seen Trevor Story absolutely been traded at this deadline had the draft pick compensation not been a factor. Because they were basically telling teams like, if you're not going to offer us anything that's right around what that pick would be, then we'll just go with a pick. The DH is going to be, I used to be one of those that was full on the pitchers need to hit. I like the strategy of the game and that. And then when it came in 2020 in the shortened season, and I kind of saw it every day watching the Dodgers and stuff. It kind of turned a new leaf over for me. I'm more in favor of it now. I do wish that there was an area like you were talking about. Maybe they apply it to the starting pitcher. That would also help prevent teams from using those opener type guys and not as many bullpen games. But I think overall it's a better thing for the DH to come to the National League as well, because it opens up those opportunities for older guys that can't play the field as well to still have a spot. Like, Nelson Cruz now immediately when he's on the market, instead of having maybe 5 teams that are interested because teams in the AL already had, guys or not competitive, he's got probably 10 to 12 options now of places that would sign him for a
Yeah.
1-year deal or something. So I think that it is going to bring that in, and I do think that's better for the game. Like you said, the lottery is not really going to help much though, because the NBA has a tanking
I mean,
issue already.
it's not going to do anything. I mean, because they're not going to give like the first team out of the playoffs the number one overall pick, but they'll have some kind of like percentage
I,
chance, and then if you're like the fifth,
I
worst
think it's
record, you actually have a pretty good chance. But
I believe it's only for the top 8.
oh yeah,
So
I mean,
it's being talked of only the top 8 picks would be into a draft lottery.
yeah, I mean, I just
Um,
I don't know the details of it and stuff. I just know they had talked about the draft lottery, but definitely an interesting thing there. And then the one other thing that sounds like it might have come out of these negotiations that I think the players are going to love is the lack of options. Um, that they're going to limit how many times you can option a player during a season, and that's a big deal because when you look at some of these teams, like I'll tell you, for example, one example is Atlanta this year used so many different pitchers, and they called it they because that's one of the places the AAA team is in. It's in Atlanta basically. It's in Gwinnett, so just 30 minutes north. They called it the Gwinnett Shuffle because they would go straight up to Gwinnett, and they would go, then they go back, and it would just be back and forth like once a week. So it was definitely interesting, and that it's going to eliminate that, which is a good thing. I think the players hated that, and honestly, that's bad for player development too. So, but we'll see what happens. I definitely I definitely like some of these moves. I think that some of these things are things that the players are going to like. But this deal's not done yet. So,
Yeah, there'll be a lot more CBA talk to come, unfortunately.
yep.
But let's go ahead and move on to a retirement that we had today, and that's of Mr. National. Ryan Zimmerman announced his retirement today after a 16-year career with the Washington Nationals. Did opt out in 2020, so that would have been his 17th season. But he was the first ever draft pick of the Washington Nationals after they came over from being the Expos, and spent his whole career there. And he's kind of the guy that everyone, if you think of the Washington Nationals, you think of Ryan Zimmerman.
Yes, for sure. Ryan Zimmerman's a guy who, he came up 2005, 20 years old, and he was just immediately good. You look at his first, from 2005 to 2013, just put up great numbers. He did miss some games in 2011, but other than and in 2008, where he only played like 105 games. But other than that, I mean, in his full seasons, his first four full seasons in the big leagues, he put up, 4.5 or 3.8 wins above replacement, 4.5 wins above replacement, and then he put 6.6 wins above replacement back to back years, 2009, 2010. This guy was like an all-star, like really a superstar caliber player, when he was young, but injuries really caught up to him. I remember back in maybe 2013, as someone who watched Nationals a lot, 'cause, they were playing the Braves a lot. He, he started having issues with his shoulder and his throwing arm, and I mean, like he went from being like an elite defensive third baseman to not being able to play there anymore, and his bat just wasn't quite good enough to carry a first baseman's, what a first baseman needs to do hitting wise. I mean, he put up like, a 115 WRC plus. To be an elite first baseman, you really need to be in the more than the 125, 130 at least. And he did put up a fantastic 2017 with 36 home runs, a 137 WRC plus. But man, I wish he had stayed healthy, because he could have honestly gotten close to a borderline Hall of Fame career if he had stayed healthy. And but congrats to Ryan Zimmerman, a very productive long career in the big leagues, and all the best to him in retirement. And I have a feeling we'll probably see him around some the game. He's been around the Nationals for so long. He's one of those guys that's probably gonna be serve some kind of role as in Washington, advisory role, or maybe he goes into the media or something. Like I have a feeling that he'll be around some. So hopefully Ryan Zimmerman has a great retirement and a great career for him. So.
Yeah, he's been somebody who's been really good on camera when given that opportunity. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him jump into, maybe one of those postseason roles, or maybe even on Nationals TV as like a studio role or something. But great career for Zimmerman. I wish it would have ended a little bit better for him. Those past couple years were really rough to watch. I mean, basically from 2018 on, you could tell he was kind of really just struggling through it all. But glad to see that he can go out on his own terms, because I think a lot of players struggle with that, and when they make that move. So glad that he opted out for 2020, and then glad he came back for 2021 and kind of do that swan song with the fans there at least. So. But let's go ahead and jump over to the NL West division breakdown. We'll go ahead and start with the San Francisco Giants, who won this division at going 107-55. You look over who they've lost so far. They lost Buster Posey to retirement, Johnny Cueto, Kevin Gossman, Chris Bryant, Tyler Chatwood, Donovan Solano, Tony Watson, Scott Kazmir, and Alex Dickerson.
Yeah, so this is an interesting team going forward. I'm still like, even after watching them, and they were legit last year. Like, they were really good. I still have no idea how that roster won 107 games. And they lose a lot of pieces off that team. Like you said, I think the big pieces would be obviously Chris Bryant, but I mean, Buster Posey had that bounce back year last year. Kevin Gossman was really good for his last 2 years there. So some of those other guys. I mean, Cueto, honestly, that probably helps them that he's gone because of just money. Um, And even though he pitched a little bit this year, and I don't think he's just a horrible pitcher, but um, at this point, but he's not what he once was. And then a couple of those relievers. I think Donovan Solano hurts a little bit too. He had some pretty good, he's a pretty good bench player for them. But they added Alex Cobb, who is a guy that I think will do really well with the Giants, and the way they utilize their pitchers. I think you'll see Alex Cobb be kind of one of those guys who has a good year all of a sudden because he went to the Giants, and that's kind of becoming their reputation. And then, Hunter Harvey is another guy they added who isn't that big of a deal, but is a former top prospect. He's kind of interesting to have added to that team. So, my outlook for them, they have some needs for sure. They definitely need somebody who can play center field, but an outfielder in general. But definitely, they don't really have anybody that's really good at center. And then you look at, they still need a starting pitcher or two. They need somebody to replace the production of Kevin Gossman, whether that's one guy or a couple different guys that can combine to replace that. They've got a pretty good little core there with, they got DeSclafani coming back. They got, after they re-signed him, they've got Logan Webb, coming back off that, super breakout year. And they've got, Alex Wood coming back too. So a few good pieces there coming back, but, I think they're kind of a borderline contender. I don't think they'll repeat last year. Like, I don't think Brandon Crawford's going to be an MVP, favorite this year like he was last year. I mean, I don't think that, you got aging players all over the place still. You look at Brandon Belt. I think he's a really solid player, but he's a first baseman that's up there in age a little bit. You look at Evan Longoria is probably, he's probably on the decline a little bit. But this lineup's still pretty good, and they're going to use their platoon advantages. They got a pretty good bullpen, and maybe they have a breakout. Maybe a guy like Joey Bart, who's going to be their catcher of the year this year. Maybe he comes out and and he starts really coming on in the big leagues, and and you don't miss a beat from losing Buster Posey. So I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it's possible. He's a talented guy. So, my outlook for them, I still think they need pieces to really contend. And a lot of things went right for them last year. They're going to have a lot of things go right again. So, I'm definitely interested to see how this team looks coming start of the year.
Yeah, I'm not going to undersell the Giants anymore. Like, I did it this last year, and then they just proved me wrong. They just always find a way to win. They're one of those teams that just, no matter how bad you really think they are, they just find some way. They're bringing a majority of the pieces back. You did mention, Belt and Crawford. Are they going to be able to, kind of have those seasons that they had last year? Losing Posey, that's massive, not just for, his rejuvenation as a offensive player, but also what he meant to them, for that pitching staff. He really carried that staff all the way through, and was just a good mentor for them. And right now, Joey Bart's not going to be Buster Posey behind the plate. Kurt Casale, he's a good defensive catcher, probably better than Posey, but can he call the same game? Can he still help the pitching staff the way that Posey did? And still be able to limit the runners. I think Casale's better than Posey, just barely at that, but I think Posey kind of had a rejuvenation of that the past couple years. And we don't know how Bart's going to be. He's a really big question mark behind that. And then losing Gossman, that is a big deal as well. Going in with Alex Wood as your 3 and Alex Cobb as your 4, those are two guys who have struggled to stay healthy the past couple years. Cobb only pitched 93 innings last year. Wood only pitched 130 innings or 138 innings last year. And then right now your 5th starter is Tyler Beatty. So you need some sort of of at least 1 to 2 more pitchers. Because and not just like roster filler number 5 starters. You probably want a number 3 starter in there somewhere, to kind of push Wood and Cobb to be in more of your back end of your rotation rather than kind of the middle of it. But the bullpen is still really good. The team overall, I mean, they still have a lot of the core pieces intact. And like you said, they'll use those numbers. They'll use the platoon advantages. Farhan Zaidi and Gabe Kapler have a really good relationship, and we saw that really blossom this year. And I'm not going to discount. And I think they're going to be in contention for probably a wild card. And if they do get things start breaking right, then definitely into fighting for the division probably.
Yeah, and you mentioned Buster Posey. Like, you're not going to replace a 5 WAR catcher with a rookie or a career backup. But,
Right.
if you can come somewhat, if you can get 3 WAR out of Joey Bart, that's a big deal. Like, so we'll see what happens there. Definitely interested in the Giants and think that they've got a good shot. But moving on, the team that I think is probably going to be the favorite in this division again, even though they didn't win last year, winning 106 games, was the Los Angeles Dodgers. They did lose a lot, but of course they had so much to start with that. Some of these losses don't even matter all that much, but they lose, Albert Pujols, who, was platooning a little bit and coming off the bench for them. Kenley Jansen, which is a pretty big deal, but Jansen has had his inconsistencies the last couple of years, even though he was great down the stretch last year. He's aging, so maybe you've got guys like Brusdar Gratterall that could move into that position. Max Scherzer, who was there half the season last year, you lose him to the Mets. That one hurts. Kershaw, we still don't know if he comes back. Obviously, right now he's free agent. Danny Duffy didn't pitch much for him. Jimmy Nelson didn't pitch a lot for him. Steven Souza was on the postseason roster. They lost him. Corey Knebels and Joe Kelly are two pretty good depth pieces that they had in their bullpen that they lose. But of course, they also had some young guys come up last year that were real successful. That they can that can replace those guys. And then you look at Corey Seager being the big one. I mean, you lose your franchise shortstop that you've had for the last 5 or 6 years, coming off of his best couple seasons of his career. So definitely a lot of losses for the Dodgers, and they really haven't added all that much yet. They did re-sign Chris Taylor, which is kind of a note on additions, even though he's not a true addition. They added Andrew Haney, who is kind of an interesting ad from was with the Angels and the Yankees midseason last year with the trade, and Daniel Hudson's kind of going to replace that Joe Kelly, Corey Knebel role.
Yeah, and another, he's not technically a true addition, but because he was signed last offseason but didn't pitch. It's going to be Tommy Canley,
Yeah,
also another
about
fill-in
him.
in that bullpen who will be, he'll probably fill kind of that Corey Knebel role, being the kind of a 6th or 7th inning guy, kind of just do everything. Losing Seager absolutely hurts. I think that's more of the reason why they made the Trey Turner trade at the deadline, was because they weren't confident enough that they were going to be able to sign Seager long term. So at least you have Turner to fill in for this year. And then it opens up second base with re-signing Taylor. He could probably play there. Gavin Lux will probably get the run at second base to start with. That they'd like Taylor to be able to have the utility role. The team, there isn't much holes that it needs to fill. I mean, it's such a good team that even losing those guys, and I still do expect Kershaw to come back. He was in LA for the Super Bowl talking with the media and stuff, and he kept referring to everything as like we, and talking about how he's preparing for the season. And so I still do think that he comes back in some sort, but you know, overall, the team doesn't need much. I mean, the lineup is still probably one of the best lineups in baseball from 1 through 9. If you're looking through, even losing Seager, I'm sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. They could use probably some sort of a bench outfielder. I mean, right now their backup outfielder is Luke Raley, so you could probably use somebody who's better at that. But overall, it's a real solid, overall the team is really good. The rotation, you do have some question marks because what are you going to get from Heaney? You signed him to be a breakout guy. You still do have David Price in that number 5 role. Are you going to get Bauer back this year? Who knows? When is Dustin May going to be able to come back? How is this lockout even affecting his Tommy John recovery? That's a thing I think we are not even talking about enough, is what are this lockout doing for these injured players that's coming back off injuries. So, but overall, I mean, I don't think that they have much they need. I think the outlook for them just needs to be, can they stay healthy? Can Bellinger bounce back to, what the Bellinger we know? Part of that was his health. He battled a lot of injuries last year. Mookie, he battled the hip injury all year and never really seemed to be himself, even though, the stats you look at it, it's still a good season, but it's not a season up to Mookie Betts standards. And then how are you going to be able to bounce back losing Seager, even though you did have Turner? You need guys like Lux and them to step up, but kind of that all just depends on their health.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, Luck stepping up will go a long way because he's going to man probably second base every day this year. Um, and health. Max Muncy, how healthy is he going to be at the start of the season? Is he going to play at the start of the season? Is he going to be, when he comes back, is he going to be fully healthy? You look at, pitching wise, obviously, what are we going to see? Are we going to see Trevor Bauer? Is that something that's going to happen? Or I know he alienated a lot of people there, even though and MLB is still investigating him, so we don't even know. But we do know that there's no criminal charges, as we discussed last week. So I guess that kind of opens the door for a possibility we see him. Are you going to see? How is that pitching going to do? I mean, you're probably going to have to rely on at this point. Obviously, Walker Buehler is going to be at the top of that rotation. Julio Urias is going to be up there. But you're probably going to have to rely on some Tony Gonsolins of the world. Like, Tony Gonsolin's a little bit inconsistent. How's Dustin May going to come back when he does? Hopefully mid-season. So there's definitely some question marks in their rotation and in their bullpen because Kenley Jansen's been that anchor for so long, and now you're talking about needing a new anchor in that bullpen. I mean, I think the bullpen's going to be fine. They have a lot of talent, and they've had a lot of talent, or it might not even be Grotto. I didn't even mention Blake Trinan earlier, maybe stepping into that closer role. But we'll see what happens. I'm definitely intrigued by them. I definitely think that with all the talent that they still have, they are the favorite in the NL West. Even though the Giants did win last year, and with all the Dodgers losses, I mean, but a lot of it's going to ride on Cody Bellinger having a bounce back. Is Gavin Lux going to take a step forward? I mean, that's one of those things like Corey Seager could be counted on at a certain level, but you can't necessarily count on Lux, even though a lot of people like him and think he's going to be good. So there's question marks, but more so maybe than there's been in the last couple of years, even. But I still think this team is really good, and it's the favorite in the division, and probably the favorite in the National League this year.
Yeah, I could go on for hours talking on this. So we're gonna move on to the San Diego Padres, who finished third in this division at 79 and 83, 28 games back. We were mentioning as we were kind of prepping for this show, I knew the Padres finished bad the second half of the season. They really fell off a cliff. But I didn't realize that they had fell back to 28 games back and only like 4 to 4.5 games in front of the Colorado Rockies. So that it's just really surprising the down second half that they really had. But if you look at who they did lose, they lost Adam Frazier, they lost Keona Kayla, Jake Marisnik, Mark Melanson, who was their closer. That's a big piece for them. Losing Vince Velasquez, Daniel Hudson, Tommy Pham had a really great year last year as well. And then if you look at their ads that they've added so far, Robert Suarez, Nick Martinez, Luis Gonzalez, those are three kind of not really great pitchers. Martinez is coming over from overseas, where we've seen pitchers do really well over there and kind of struggle to come back over here. They added Jorge Alfaro as like a backup catcher, and then honestly, I think the biggest addition that they've added this year was Bob Melvin, the new manager. Bob Melvin's one of the best managers in baseball, and I think that's something that they've really struggled with. The past couple managers with Andy Green and Jace Tingler.
Yeah. So you look at the Padres. I definitely think that they are a contender because they have so much talent in that lineup and in the pitching staff. But a couple things, I agree with you on Bob Melvin. I think that sometimes the Padres the last 2 years have had issues in their clubhouse with a lot of young guys there and a lot of big personalities there as well. You look at the disagreements last year. Like I think you had that disagreement with Tatis and Machado, your two star players. I mean, you need somebody to control that clubhouse just a little bit. And then I think Bob Melvin's a guy who's had a lot of success doing that. You look at I think the pitching is something that needs to get better, and I don't think it's necessarily from signing more pitchers or trading for more pitchers. I think you need Yu Darvish to pitch better because Yu Darvish has a lot of talent and he's been good for a long time, but he didn't pitch well last year. Blake Snell needs to stop walking people, or at least not stop walking people as much. I think that Joe Musgrove is a good guy to have coming back. He was kind of your ace, and don't forget that Mike Clevenger should be coming back this year. That's a guy who was really really good in Cleveland and got traded there mid-season but had injuries and Tommy John, and he missed the whole season. So you haven't really seen him much there. And a lot of people kind of talked about the Padres being a team that is really as much building for 2022 as they were for 2021 when they signed some of these guys and traded for some of these guys because they had control, and because some of them were injured. Dinelson Lamet's another guy who didn't kind of battled injury last year, and maybe he comes up big this year. So you've got that really good young lineup. You got you got pitching that definitely has a shot to rebound. Even though I'm not super high on the thought that Yu Darvish does rebound because of his age and just his history of a little inconsistency, and Blake Snell, we don't know if he's going to rebound either because he was a guy who walks have been a little bit of a problem for him before. But I definitely think the place they could improve the most is relief pitching. And as you said, Nick Martinez is a guy. Those guys coming from overseas could be hit or miss. I mean, you've had someone like Chris Martin that came over and's done really well, but you've had other guys who've come over and not done so hot from that kind of going overseas and trying to figure things out ordeal. Miles Mikolas is another guy who came over and did well. So, but you just that's kind of a wild card, and then the other guys that they signed don't really they're not really inspiring too much. So um, it'll be interesting to see what the Padres do. I definitely think that they could use a couple of pretty good bullpen moves, and they'll be better than 79 and 83 this year. I feel pretty confident in that. Hopefully. I mean, I think they're probably about on the same tier as the Giants here. That they've got a good chance to do well. They're probably a contender, or maybe more of a wild card contender. I don't know if they're going to be. I don't think they're going to be better than the Dodgers, but they're going to be a solid team. So we'll see what happens with the San Diego Padres this year.
Yeah, they still do have some question marks. They need to figure out what they're going to do with Tatis and where he's actually going to play.
Yeah.
Are you going to leave him at shortstop, or are you going to put him to the outfield? Where I mean, he showed that he could play out there, and with more time, he'll season really well to out there. They need an outfielder, which would then allow Ha-Sung Kim, one of their bigger signings last year, to transition to an everyday role at like shortstop, and he's really sound defensively. You could even move Cronenworth over to shortstop full time and have Kim play second. But and then you still would need some sort of a bench outfielder bat if you did do that. If you don't put Tatis out to the outfield, then you need at least one outfielder, maybe even two. And then probably some sort of a depth pitcher. I mean, I guess if you don't know what you're going to get with Lamet, how much is Clevenger going to be able to pitch being off for a year and a half? I don't think you can count on him to be able to have 200 innings. He's probably going to be limited somewhere around the 150-ish mark, I would say, maybe 180. But that's all together. So you have to include the postseason kind of in that. And then, what you're going to get with Nick Martinez, you just don't know. Those guys are hit or miss. Snell, he did have a better second half of the season. He still had some of the walk issues, but overall had a better second half than he did starting with San Diego. So overall, the team is the talent is there. The team is really good. They just need to, kind of around the edges, make it a little bit better. And then the manager itself, like, I don't want to downplay how big of a deal it is for them to get a manager like Bob Melvin. What he's been able to do with not that much in Oakland the past couple of years, and get the players to continue to buy in to it. That's going to be massive for the Padres, because I think that's something that they haven't had. A lot of the Padres has been playing me ball and not like playing for the team and doing whatever the team needs, and that's going to change this year. And that could really take them to that next step to get into the postseason, which they've really struggled to do.
Yeah, for sure. So definitely a team that's there to watch, and we'll move on now though to a team that maybe not so much there to watch. And this is the team that is probably the most widely criticized franchise right now in baseball. If I had to say, I mean, there's a lot of people criticizing several different franchises that aren't having a lot of success, but I really think that Colorado has gotten more flack than any other franchise for the way they've run their team the last few years. And so yeah, let's talk about Colorado. Their additions are, well, nobody, and their losses are their best player. So they lost and one of their best pitchers too. Probably not their very best pitcher, because I think that German Marquez is still there, but they lose Trevor Story, not Sonny Gray, John Gray, and Chris Owings, who I mean he was a big league player, but the other guys are important. It sucks for them to lose, Trevor Story without really getting anything for him other than a draft pick, which is not really that much. And of course, this might be one of the final times you ever see a draft pick compensation pick like that. But they probably should have gotten more for him. You look at John Gray as somebody who, probably was affected a ton by Colorado, by pitching in obviously in Coors Field, and then he signed a big deal elsewhere, so obviously somebody thought highly of him. And like I say, they just haven't added anybody so far. So I'm sure they'll add some veteran type players, but right now it's a big zero. It's a big fat goose egg on additions.
Yeah, I don't even know where to start with the Rockies. I mean, or even the next team we'll talk about. I even asked Matt before the show, like, do we have to talk about the last two, or can we just like stop after the Padres? But he said we had to we had to talk about them, so we will. But this team, I think they're just getting that new regime in there, but they're a team that kind of alienated Nolan Arenado for, he had a big opt out in the deal and he basically forced him to trade him. Story, if he had that, was trying to force his way to get traded. I think Gray did want to stay, but they just, I don't even know what the deal was with that. But this team, it just feels like they're kind of in a rebuild mode, but then they're not. I mean, they're like consistently talking about how they want to be competitive, but then so far into the lockout, or before the lockout, they didn't sign anybody, and then you don't trade your good players who you can't re-sign or didn't even try to re-sign for potential pieces to help you, and then you can't develop your young players. Like, how long have we been waiting to see Brendan Rodgers come up and get consistent playing time, and he finally got it this year, to 400 at bats. um, how long have we been seeing Ryan McMahon to finally have his breakout? And he kind of started the year with that and then struggled later on. It's always going to be hard for Colorado to develop pitching just because of the ballpark and the air where they're at. Um, but they found some of those guys, and Freeland had a good season. John Gray was one of the guys who actually was better in Colorado than he was on the road. And you have a guy like Herman Marquez there, but I don't even know where what the outlook is for them. I mean, it's bad, but then it's not like you're not bad enough to really do anything or mean anything, but you're not good enough to do anything either.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing with the Rockies. This is what's frustrating to me about about the Rockies to me. Their pitching, their starting pitching is not really all that bad. I mean, they probably have the best collection of starting pitchers they've ever had in Colorado uh, before this year. Herman Marquez, John Gray, Antonio Senzatella was actually pretty good, like especially in 2020. And then Freeland's been a little hit or miss, but he's not a bad pitcher. He put up a 4.33 ERA this year. So this team's not. I mean, their pitching staff is not as bad as typical Colorado pitching staffs have been. Their bullpen's been pretty bad, and you look at their lineup, and their lineup's where they're struggling now. It's like, if they could sign a few players that are good defensive players that make a lot of contact, get those Coors Field hits, they could do pretty well. But they're in that purgatory. I mean, they're not. They're just letting guys' contracts run out. They're not signing extensions. They're not bringing players to lock up long term. They're not. They're not really spending a lot of money to go out and get a marquee free agent. They're not trading guys to get highly thought of prospects either. I mean, you could have traded you needed to either extend Trevor Story or trade Trevor Story, and they did neither. And they're going into the same thing now with Herman Marquez. It's like you need to either trade him or you need to build a team around him and extend it. And I mean, obviously he's got a couple more years on his deal, but you either build a team around him or trade him while you can get a lot for him. Like, I mean, because Herman Marquez should be, really highly thought of as a guy to go elsewhere and be real successful. Because he's had really good seasons in Coors. I mean, he's a guy who, if he take him out of Coors, he might be an ace. Like, he's that good. And but he's, they're just kind of being the Rockies, and they don't. My outlook for them, the first thing I put on there is they need an organizational strategy. Are you going to rebuild? Are you going to go build up your farm system, get some high draft picks? Are you going to do that, or are you going to try to contend? Because you can't do in between. That's not the way it works, unfortunately. And then the other thing, like you mentioned, is actually develop some of these young players. Let Brendan Rodgers take over, and I'm sure he will now with shortstop being open. But let him take over. Let him be the guy. Let him see what he's got. A lot of they've done too much in the past few years of having these really highly thought of guys like Brendan Rodgers get bounced around by the with the farm system and not get a chance to develop. And that's something that's badly needed for the Rockies. But you look at them as a team that they've got pieces to move if they wanted to. I mean, Herman Marquez could get traded anywhere in baseball and get you a huge return because he's a really good pitcher. So trade him. I mean, or build around him and win. So we'll see what happens. Maybe the Rockies will figure it out. I'm sure that they're tired of going 74 and whatever they did, 74 and 87, or it would normally be 74 and 88, but they had a game canceled late in the year for weather that did get rescheduled. Um, but yeah, I mean, just have a strategy. Like figure out, look at the next 5 years. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Because right now you're mediocre. So
Yeah, I mean that's kind of been the issue
yep,
with the Rockies the past couple of years. Is like they just ever since they lost to the Diamondbacks in that postseason, they just haven't not. I think it was it 2017 or 18.
I think it was 2017.
I think it was 17 as well. Ever since they lost to them, I mean they just have gone the wrong direction. So they do need to figure that out. And maybe this new regime is going to finally do that. Who knows? But let's go ahead and move on to the team that finished last in this division, and that's the Arizona Diamondbacks, finished at 52 and 110, 55 games back. They're kind of the model of what the Rockies need to follow. They kind of, tried to go, hey, let's just be the super bad team. If you looked at who they've lost so far, they've only lost Cole Calhoun and Tyler Clippard from their major league roster. Then their additions, they added Dan Straley on a minor league deal, which was a little bit of interesting. Um, being a former big leaguer and having a lot of big league time, he'll probably be the most well-known name there. And then Mark Melanson, we talked about him for the Padres. It was weird to see an established, veteran closer go to a team like the Diamondbacks, who on a 2-year deal even, that you don't think is really going to be competitive.
Yeah. So there's a couple pretty good additions. That especially Mark Melanson, who I think he led the National League in saves last year, but they didn't make a ton. They don't have a ton of movement. Their outlook, obviously, they're in full fledged rebuild. I think the biggest decision they need to make is on Ketel Marte, because you don't know if you want to have Ketel Marte, be a part of your future. If so, you probably need to get him, extend his contract. And if not, you need to trade him now because he's got a lot of value, and he's somebody that teams will think of as a potential all star. So this year, so you could move him. But looking at this team, they actually have some talent in this roster, and some young talent at that. Um, you look at some of these young guys. Dalton Varsho is a young player who's shown a little bit of promise. Look at a couple young, outfielders slash, DH types like Pavin Smith, Seth Beer, who are pretty highly picked in the draft and talented looking players. Josh Rojas is pretty good in his first season. Obviously, like I mentioned, Ketel Marte, he's still there for now, so you can count him as being one of their star players. So they really do have some pretty good players in their lineup, and some guys that they can, for one thing, they can build around them, and for another thing, you've got some of these guys that a couple of them could break out and really become stars, so they're getting that playing time. Unlike the Rockies, who are bringing in guys like CJ Crone to take up spots for that they can use guys for their future in. The Diamondbacks are using their spots and for playing time for guys who have a chance to be future big leaguers. I mean, really, they've got two players that are over 30 or three players over 30 in their entire lineup. I mean, most of their guys are in the mid 20s and are kind of journeymen or prospects. So definitely an interesting looking lineup. You look at their pitching, and I mean, Madison Bumgarner was not a great signing, and he seems to be just pretty bleh at age 32 and a half. He really needs some improvement this year, because right now that looks like a really bad contract. Zach Gallen's a good pitcher, but he's going to be pretty solid for a while. I mean, the rest of their rotation's not very good. Their bullpen, even with the addition of Mark Melanson, is not very good. Although Caleb Smith is a guy who I think is going to pitch out of their bullpen a bit, and he's somebody that I like a lot better out of the bullpen than I did as a starter. So he's definitely an interesting looking player to have, and they've got a good farm system and a much better farm system they've had in a long time. So kind of the things for them is maybe trade a couple of their veterans, definitely trade David Peralta. I have no idea how he stayed on the team this long, but Chitel Marte is definitely kind of the key to that. And then they got, like I say, they got a good farm system. I mean, you got a lot of good young you know young guys in that farm system that could eventually be really good big leaguers. So um, and just continue to develop those guys. First round pick Jordan Lawler, was highly picked in the draft. Was A lot of people thought he was going to be the best player in the draft. So do have him come up and develop him. No, don't pull him up this year, obviously, but have him develop, and you might have something there. I mean, this is a team that they're on the right track. They're just going to be really bad for a couple more years at the big league level, but they've got pieces coming on the way in a few years.
Yeah, the thing is, at least they have the pieces. I think that's the big thing. Is like
Yep.
they have the pieces compared to the Rockies, where the Rockies are like, well, we really don't know what you have. You really don't even know what you have. The Rockies gave way to those young players this year. They let Josh Rojas get a lot of plate appearances. They let Dalton Varsho get a good amount of plate appearances. They let Pavin Smith get almost 600 at bats. Seth Beers should be up this year and can get enough of the plate appearances as well. You're still going to have like Madison Bumgardner on the in your rotation, but you have Zach Gallen who can be really good. Luke Weaver, I think he struggled a little bit last year, but the year before that, or I think 2020 or 2019, one of those 2 years, he was really good. So they do have the pieces. And then, like you said, mentioned Jordan Lawler, who they drafted this last year. They're going to have the number 2 pick in this draft as well. So they'll be able to get another young star, or young player in there that might turn into a star for them. So I definitely am more encouraged about the Diamondbacks outlook in the next 5 years than I am for the Rockies outlook in the next 5 years. And I think that's kind of what we were trying to say with the Rockies is like, hey, you need to kind of follow this one more.
Yep.
You need to stack this young talent and let them develop some
Yep.
and let them play. Where the Diamondbacks have kind of did that, and they're gonna look. We're gonna be bad, and they've kind of said it. We're gonna be bad for the next couple of years. We accept it, but going forward, we have a bright future ahead of us.
Yep. And that's one of those things that you want to call it tanking, call it whatever you want to. Like, I mean, it's kind of the way things are, and it's the way you have to win in professional sports. And baseball maybe not quite as much, but as others, because high draft picks aren't quite as valuable in baseball. But you know it's one of those things, like they're gonna have to do it. And look at teams that are starting to become successful now, like look at the Tigers. Now they can spend a lot of money because they've got money open, and they've got players coming up that they really like, and they might be able to be good soon. Like, so that's kind of the and obviously the last wave of those teams were like the Braves, Cubs, Astros. All three of those teams have won World Series titles. So, this is the way to do it now, unless you're the Dodgers or the Yankees and have unlimited money to spend. This is the only way to do it. You can't. You're not going to be able to. You're not going to be able to win a championship by going 500 every year and getting lucky once. Like, that's
Right.
probably not going to happen. Like, you're going to have to go get some real talent. And these teams that are winning right now, with, like I say, with the exception of maybe the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the Red Sox, like these teams that are winning right now, they, they have to, they're going to have to, they're, they've all been through it, so that's something you have to look at. And unfortunately, it's part of the game, and there's really no way to change that either. I mean,
Yeah.
are you going to reward team? Are you going to make teams with really good teams get top draft picks? Because I mean, that's really not going to balance the league very well. I mean, like
Right.
the whole purpose is to balance things out where everybody, every team can have a shot. But are you just going to let good teams get better? Like, I don't think that's not something that's good for the game. I don't think so. tanking's going to stay, forever for that reason. And, maybe there's ways they can, mitigate it a little bit, um, but I mean, the Diamondbacks are taking advantage of it right now, and I bet, if they make the right moves on, who to draft and who to sign when it comes time to it, and who to trade, they'll be real successful. They'll be up there in 3 or 4 years, like the Braves and Astros and Cubs, who are kind of those recent rebuilds have been the last few years. So definitely something to look at. And but they're going to be taking their lumps in 2022. It's not going to be pretty. I mean, they lost 110 games last year. I don't see them improving too much off of that. So
yeah, I don't see him really being much of a improvement either. But that's basically going to wrap up for the NL West division breakdown side of it. Before we did end this episode, I did want to mention that we're, at least on my end, I'm trying to expand our social media presence from just Twitter to Instagram. I made a new Instagram. It's at the Batflip Podcast. If you guys want to go like and follow that page. And then also I'm going to be trying something here soon, and still working on it. So give me some little bit of time, but I'm going to try and start uploading the podcast to YouTube as well. It's going to be an extra little process that I'm still learning how to do. I posted one today, but it did not go as much as I wanted it to smoothly. So I'll be working through that, but hopefully I can get a graphic made and everything within the next week or so, and then kind of improve on that. And then going forward, we'll still have it on the podcast side, but it'll at least be another way on YouTube. That is also the Batflip Podcast. So if you want to go subscribe over there.
And hey, maybe one day you'll get to see our smiling faces if I ever decide to get a webcam.
Yeah, maybe. That's going to be I'm barely trying to figure out how to convert the files
it's
enough
going to take a little bit of time
YouTube.
for something like that, but
I don't even want to think about trying to add video on top of it all right now. But it's just something else. I've noticed that on Twitter, we've built a decent following on Twitter. We still get a good amount of interactions on there, but I think it's time, at least for me. I want to try and find the other ways to help grow it, and I think branching out to these other platforms, at least Instagram and YouTube, I think that's going to be a big one. Is if we can get our faces on there eventually, that'll be great. But a lot of people scroll through YouTube all day. But any likes we get on there, any subscribes, likes or follows on Instagram, it just kind of helps grow it all. So if you guys want to go, follow on Instagram, it is under the Batflip Podcast. And then on YouTube, it is also the Batflip Podcast. And I will put a link to the YouTube, at least, because it's kind of hard to find with no subscribers. I'll put that in our Twitter account bio, which is also at the Batflip Podcast, so it's easier to find, to start with, at least. So that's something that I wanted to hit on at the end of the episode and try and get those to branch out. I think I just created them yesterday or something, so we're still building the following on them. So I want to try and get that out as much as possible.
Yeah, that's really good. I appreciate you, working on that, Damien. And I really like those. I really like those other platforms, because I think that as the two of us have been really involved with Twitter for a long time, we kind of forget there's other things out there that we need that a lot of people use and don't use Twitter. So it's something that's definitely good. Always trying to grow our brand a little bit, and definitely appreciate you doing that. And everyone, go get us a follow on there. Go subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Instagram, and we'll follow our personal accounts on Twitter as well. We tweet mostly about sports, rarely about other things. Usually it's complaining about something if it's something that's not sport. It's usually complaining about something if it is sports, but
yeah.
Like complaining about Rob Manfred, which we do here too. But yeah.
So it is funny. My phone now auto corrects Manfred to Manfraud.
yeah, you said that the other day. That's amazing.
It literally auto corrects it to Manfraud now. It's like, is this what you're trying to say? So like, that's how much like what my Twitter is like, because I only use that on Twitter, and my whole phone, even if I'm texting somebody, it now changes it. So that's pretty funny. But yeah, go give us a follow on those. When I get the graphic made for the YouTube side, I'll have it on other places as well. But I'll probably have our personal accounts on there as well, so you guys can follow those for more of a kind of like daily interaction type wise. But I rambled on enough about that, but I really wanted to make a point of that at the end of this episode and try and help build the followings on those other platforms. So, thank you guys for listening to that. Thank you guys for everything you guys do for the podcast on Twitter, and hopefully going forward on Instagram and YouTube. But for this week, that's been the Batfoot Podcast, and we'll catch you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody.